The acrid smell of smoke filled Meera Patel's nostrils as she sprinted down the main street of Millbrook, her heart pounding in her chest. The 28-year-old librarian had always been known for her quiet demeanor and love of books, but on this sweltering summer afternoon, she found herself thrust into a role she never imagined. Flames licked at the windows of the historic Millbrook Public Library, a beloved institution that had stood for over a century. Meera had just stepped out for her lunch break when she heard the first screams. Now, as she raced back towards the building, her mind whirled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Everyone out. Now," she shouted, her usually soft voice carrying with surprising authority. Patrons and staff stumbled out of the smoke-filled entrance, coughing and disoriented. Meera did a quick head count, her librarian's instinct for detail kicking in even in the chaos. That's when she heard it, a faint cry coming from inside the building. Without hesitation, Meera plunged back into the inferno. The heat was oppressive, and thick smoke obscured her vision. Meera dropped to her hands and knees, crawling towards the sound. She found 7-year-old Tommy huddled under a table in the children's section, clutching his favorite stuffed bear. "It's okay, Tommy," Meera said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "We're going to get out of here together." As they made their way to the exit, a terrifying crack echoed through the building. Meera looked up to see a massive wooden beam, engulfed in flames, starting to give way. In a split-second decision, she shoved Tommy towards the door and dove on top of him, shielding his small body with her own. The beam crashed down, missing them by inches. Meera felt a searing pain across her back, but gritted her teeth and kept moving. Moments later, they burst out of the library and into the arms of waiting paramedics. As Meera gasped for air, she became aware of the crowd that had gathered. Phones were out, recording her ash-covered form. Someone started clapping, and soon the whole street erupted in cheers. "You're a hero, Meera," shouted Mr. Johnson, the owner of the local hardware store. Meera shook her head, overwhelmed. "I just did what anyone would do," she mumbled, but her words were drowned out by the sirens of approaching fire trucks. In the days that followed, Meera's life turned upside down. Local news stations clamored for interviews, and her face was splashed across the front page of the Millbrook Gazette. Mayor Sandra Thompson presented her with a key to the city in a ceremony that left Meera blushing and stammering. But as the initial excitement began to die down, whispers started to circulate through the town of 15,000. Some praised Meera's bravery, while others questioned her judgment. "She put that child in danger by going back in," Meera overheard Mrs. Perkins saying at the grocery store. "What if they'd both been trapped?" The comment stung, but Meera tried to shake it off. She focused on healing, both physically from the burns on her back and emotionally from the trauma of the fire. Dr. Emerson, the town's only therapist, offered her free sessions, which Meera reluctantly accepted. It was during one of these sessions that Meera finally vocalized the fear that had been gnawing at her. "What if they're right?" she asked Dr. Emerson, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I made the wrong choice?" Dr. Emerson leaned forward, his kind eyes meeting Meera's. "Meera, in moments of crisis, we don't always have the luxury of perfectly rational decision-making. You acted on instinct to save a life. That's something to be proud of." Meera nodded, but the doubt lingered. She found herself avoiding the temporary library set up in the community center, unable to face the memories or the stares of her coworkers and patrons. As weeks passed, the town seemed to divide into two camps, those who hailed Meera as a local legend and those who viewed her actions as reckless. The tension came to a head at a town council meeting to discuss the library's reconstruction. Meera sat in the back, trying to make herself invisible, as Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, but it wasn't long before her name came up. "I propose we name the new children's wing after Meera Patel," Councilman Rodriguez suggested, eliciting both cheers and groans from the packed room. "Absolutely not," countered Councilwoman Reeves. "We can't be seen as endorsing such risky behavior. What kind of message does that send?" The debate raged on, with Mira sinking lower in her seat with each passing minute. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, she stood up. "Please," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "I never wanted any of this attention. I just want things to go back to normal. Can't we focus on rebuilding the library instead of arguing about me?" A hush fell over the room. Mayor Thompson cleared her throat. "Miss Patel raises a good point. Let's table the naming discussion for now and move on to the reconstruction plans." As Mira left the meeting, she felt a mix of relief and unease. She had managed to deflect the attention for now, but she knew this was far from over. The weight of her newfound status as the town's reluctant hero pressed down on her, and she wondered how long she could bear it. Little did Mira know, the fire was just the beginning. The events set in motion that day would not only change her life, but reshape the very fabric of Millbrook itself. As she walked home under the starry sky, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was on the horizon, something that would test her in ways she never imagined. The quiet librarian who had always found solace in the pages of books was about to become the protagonist in a story more dramatic and challenging than any she had ever read. And as the first part of her journey came to a close, the true adventure was only just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's Main Street as Mira Patel hurried towards the community center, her head down and a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. It had been 2 months since the library fire, and the attention showed no signs of abating. As she passed Rosie's diner, a group of teenagers spotted her. "Hey, it's the library lady," one of them called out. Mira quickened her pace, her cheeks burning. Inside the makeshift library, Mira's colleague, Sarah, greeted her with a sympathetic smile. "There's a reporter from the Chronicle waiting to talk to you," she said apologetically. "I told him you were busy, but he insisted on waiting." Mira sighed. The media frenzy had been relentless. What had started as local news had spread to national outlets, with Mira's story being hailed as an example of everyday heroism. She had declined most interview requests, but the persistent journalists seemed to take this as a challenge. "Miss Patel," the reporter, an eager young man named Alex, bounded up to her. "I was hoping we could chat about your experiences since the fire. How has life changed for you?" Mira opened her mouth to politely decline, but before she could speak, a booming voice interrupted. "Leave her alone. Can't you vultures see you're making her uncomfortable?" Mira turned to see Mr. Grayson, a retired English teacher and one of the library's most devoted patrons. His face was red with indignation as he glared at the reporter. Alex held up his hands defensively. "I'm just trying to tell her story. The public has a right to know." "The public can mind their own business," Mr. Grayson retorted. "Mira's a hero, not some sideshow attraction for you to exploit." As the two men argued, Mira felt her anxiety rising. This was exactly the kind of scene she had been dreading. She slipped away, retreating to the back room where the few books they had managed to salvage were being restored. Later that afternoon, as Mira was carefully cleaning the smoke damage from a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, Sarah burst in, her eyes wide. "Mira, you need to see this," she said, thrusting her phone towards her. On the screen was a video titled The Truth About Millbrook's Hero Librarian. With trembling hands, Mira pressed play. The video, clearly shot by someone hiding behind a shelf in the community center, showed her interaction with the reporter and Mr. Grayson's intervention. But it had been edited to make it seem like Mira was rudely dismissing the reporter, with ominous music playing in the background. A voiceover intoned, "Is Mira Patel really the hero Millbrook deserves? Or is she hiding something? Why won't she talk to the press? What really happened that day in the library?" Mira felt sick. "Who would do this?" she whispered. Sarah shook her head. "It's going viral. People are speculating all sorts of things in the comments." The video was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Millbrook became a town obsessed. Everywhere Mira went, she felt eyes on her, heard whispers behind her back. Some people went out of their way to praise her, while others openly questioned her motives. The controversy reached a boiling point when the school board met to discuss the upcoming career day. Traditionally, local professionals would visit classrooms to talk about their jobs. This year, several parents had requested that Mira be invited to speak about her experience. "She's a role model for our children," argued Mrs. Hernandez, a third-grade teacher. "They should hear about bravery and quick thinking in a crisis." "Are you kidding?" countered Mr. Finch, whose son had been in the library that day. "She put lives at risk. Is that really what we want to teach our kids?" The debate raged on, with Mira's name being tossed back and forth like a hot potato. She sat in the back of the room, feeling smaller with each passing minute. Finally, Principal Winters called for order. "I think we're losing sight of what's important here," he said firmly. "This event has clearly had a significant impact on our community. Perhaps instead of arguing about Ms. Patel's actions, we should be discussing how to better prepare our children for emergencies." His words seemed to deflate some of the tension in the room. As the meeting adjourned, Mira slipped out, hoping to avoid any confrontations. But as she walked to her car, she heard someone calling her name. It was Tommy, the boy she had rescued from the fire, along with his mother, Mrs. Chen. Mira braced herself, unsure what to expect. "Miss Mira," Tommy exclaimed, running up to her. "I made this for you in art class." He thrust a slightly crumpled piece of paper into her hands. Mira unfolded it to find a crayon drawing of two figures, one small, one tall, surrounded by red and orange scribbles. At the top, in wobbly letters, it said, "My hero." Tears pricked at Mira's eyes as she knelt down to Tommy's level. "Thank you, Tommy. This is beautiful." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her expression a mix of gratitude and concern. "Mira, I can't thank you enough for what you did. But I've been worried about you. How are you holding up with all this attention?" The simple question, asked with genuine care, broke something open in Mira. Before she knew it, she was pouring out her fears and frustrations to Mrs. Chen. How she never wanted to be in the spotlight, how the constant scrutiny was wearing her down, how she sometimes wished she could just disappear. Mrs. Chen listened patiently, then placed a comforting hand on Mira's shoulder. "You know, my grandmother used to say that a pearl is formed when a grain of sand irritates an oyster. Maybe all this discomfort is just the process of you becoming something even more beautiful." The words struck a chord in Mira. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope that something positive might come out of this ordeal. As she drove home that evening, Mira's mind was whirling. The town was still divided, and she was still at the center of a storm she never asked for. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn this situation around. She thought about Principal Winters' suggestion of emergency preparedness and about the kindness Mrs. Chen had shown her. What if, instead of hiding from the attention, she found a way to use it for good? Mira pulled into her driveway, her decision made. Tomorrow, she would go to Mayor Thompson's office and propose a town-wide initiative on community safety and crisis response. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger journey. The quiet librarian who had always preferred the company of books was about to step into a role she never imagined. And in doing so, she might just help heal the rifts in her beloved town. Little did she know, the true test of her strength and the town's unity was yet to come. As Millbrook teetered on the edge of transformation, forces were at work that would soon push Mira and her neighbors to their limits, forcing them to confront not just the present crisis, but long-buried secrets from the past. The stage was set for a drama that would redefine not just Mira's life, but the very soul of Millbrook itself. The autumn leaves crunched under Mira's feet as she made her way to the temporary library housed in the community center. It had been 3 months since she had proposed the Community Safety Initiative to Mayor Thompson, and to her surprise, the idea had gained traction. Today, she was scheduled to give a presentation on basic first aid to a group of high school students. As Mira approached the building, she noticed a cluster of people gathered around the bulletin board outside. Curious, she edged closer to see what had captured their attention. Her heart sank as she saw the headline of a newspaper clipping pinned to the board. Hero Librarian's Dark Secret Revealed. Beneath it was a grainy photograph of a much younger Mira, her face tear-stained and defiant, being led away from a burning building by a police officer. Mira felt the blood drain from her face. She had worked so hard to put that part of her life behind her, and now, just as she was starting to find her footing in her new role, the past had come back to haunt her. "Is it true?" a voice asked from behind her. Mira turned to see Mrs. Perkins, one of her most vocal critics, staring at her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Were you really arrested for arson when you were a teenager?" Mira opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could she explain the complexities of her? Mira's mind raced as she stood frozen before the accusatory gazes of her neighbors. The cheerful autumn day suddenly felt cold and oppressive. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form a coherent thought, a booming voice cut through the tension. Now, let's not jump to conclusions based on some tabloid nonsense," said Chief Robert Hawkins, Millbrook's veteran police officer, as he pushed through the crowd. His weathered face bore a mix of concern and determination. "Mira, why don't you come with me? The rest of you, don't you have better things to do than gossip?" Grateful for the intervention, Mira allowed Chief Hawkins to guide her away from the prying eyes and into the quiet of his office at the nearby police station. As he closed the door behind them, Mira collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. "I suppose you want an explanation," she said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. Chief Hawkins leaned against his desk, his expression softening. "Mira, I've known you for years. You're one of the kindest souls in this town. Whatever happened in your past, I'm sure there's more to the story than what that rag of a newspaper is claiming." His words of support broke something open inside Mira. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was 14, she began. "My parents had died in a car accident the year before, and I was bouncing between foster homes. I ended up with the Donovans in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. They seemed nice at first, but—" She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Mr. Donovan, he wasn't a good man. He would come into my room at night, and I didn't know what to do." Chief Hawkins' face darkened with understanding and anger on her behalf. He nodded for her to continue. "One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until everyone was asleep and set fire to the curtains in the living room. I just wanted to create a distraction so I could run away. I didn't mean for it to spread so quickly." Mira's voice cracked. The whole house went up in flames. The Donovans got out, but their dog, I can still hear it barking. She looked up at Chief Hawkins, her eyes pleading. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just a scared kid who didn't know how else to escape." The chief was silent for a long moment, processing her story. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Mira, what happened to you was a tragedy, and it wasn't your fault. You were a child in an impossible situation. But the fire," Mira began, but Chief Hawkins held up a hand, "was a desperate act by a traumatized young girl. The real crime here was what that man did to you." He paused, considering. "Have you ever told anyone else about this?" Mira shook her head. "My case was sealed because I was a minor. After that, I was placed with a wonderful foster family who eventually adopted me. They helped me get therapy and move past it. I thought I'd left it all behind when I came to Millbrook." Chief Hawkins nodded thoughtfully. "Well, it seems the past has a way of catching up with us. The question is, what do you want to do now?" Mira's mind whirled with possibilities and fears. I don't know. If people find out the whole story, they might understand. But it could also destroy everything I've built here. The library, the safety initiative. Take some time to think about it," Chief Hawkins advised. "Whatever you decide, know that you have my support." As Mira left the police station, she felt as if she were walking in a daze. The familiar streets of Millbrook now seemed alien and threatening. Every face she passed seemed to be judging her, even though she knew the full story wasn't public yet. She found herself wandering to Willow Creek Park, a quiet spot on the edge of town where she often went to clear her head. As she sat on a bench overlooking the water, a voice startled her from her reverie. "Penny for your thoughts." Mira looked up to see Sarah, her colleague from the library, standing nearby with a concerned expression. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah asked, and Mira nodded, making room on the bench. They sat in silence for a few moments before Sarah spoke again. "I saw the article," she said softly. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're holding up." Mira felt a lump form in her throat. I don't know what to do, Sarah. Everything's falling apart." Sarah placed a comforting hand on Mira's arm. "Hey, look at me. You're the same person you were yesterday, and the day before that. The same person who ran into a burning building to save a child. Whatever happened in your past doesn't change who you are now." Mira felt a spark of hope at her friend's words, but doubt still gnawed at her. But what if people don't see it that way? What if they only see the troubled teenager I used to be? Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we'll make them see the amazing woman you've become. You've touched so many lives here, Mira. The kids who come to your reading circles, the elderly patrons you help with technology, the people you've inspired with your bravery. Those connections are real, and they matter." As they talked, Mira felt some of the weight lifting from her shoulders. She realized that she had allies in Millbrook, people who would stand by her even when things got tough. But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching voices. A group of teenagers, led by Jason Thompson, the mayor's son, came into view. They were engaged in a heated discussion. "I'm telling you, my dad says there's more to the story," Jason was saying. "We shouldn't be so quick to judge." "Oh, come on," retorted another boy. "Once an arsonist, always an arsonist. I bet she set the library fire herself just to look like a hero." Mira felt as if she'd been punched in the gut. She stood up abruptly, startling the teens who hadn't noticed her presence. "Miss Patel," Jason exclaimed, his face reddening with embarrassment. "We didn't see you there." Mira looked at the group, seeing the mix of curiosity, judgment, and confusion on their young faces. In that moment, she made a decision. "It's okay, Jason," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're right. There is more to the story, and I think it's time everyone heard it." Sarah looked at her in surprise. "Mira, are you sure?" Mira nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. "I am. I've been running from my past for too long. It's time to face it head-on." As the teenagers gathered around, their earlier argument forgotten, Mira began to tell their story. She spoke of the loss of her parents, the abuse she suffered, and the desperate act that had haunted her for years. She didn't shy away from the difficult parts, but she also shared how she had worked to overcome her trauma and build a new life. Word spread quickly through the small town, and soon more people began to gather in the park. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern for the librarian who had become an unlikely local celebrity. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Willow Creek, Mira finished her tale. She looked out at the assembled crowd, her heart pounding but her voice clear. "I'm not proud of what I did all those years ago," she said, "but I've spent every day since then trying to make amends, to be someone who helps rather than hurts. The fire at the library wasn't some elaborate scheme to look like a hero. It was a chance to finally face my fears and do the right thing." A hush fell over the crowd as Mira's words sank in. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "3 cheers for Mira Patel, the true hero of Millbrook." To Mira's astonishment, the cheer was taken up by more and more voices. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that her neighbors weren't rejecting her. They were embracing her, flaws and all. As the impromptu gathering began to disperse, people came up to Mira one by one. Some offered words of support, others shared their own stories of overcoming adversity. Mira felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But even as she basked in the warmth of her community's acceptance, a nagging thought tugged at the back of her mind. Who had dug up her past in the first place, and why? The article hadn't appeared by accident, and as the adrenaline of the day began to fade, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. As she walked home that evening, arm in arm with Sarah, Mira's mind raced with possibilities. She had faced her past and come out stronger, but something told her that the real challenge still lay ahead. Little did she know, forces were already in motion that would test not just her resolve, but the very fabric of Millbrook itself. The quiet librarian who had become an unlikely hero was about to be thrust into a mystery that would shake her small town to its core. And as the stars began to twinkle in the autumn sky, Mira Patel steeled herself for whatever might come next, knowing that this time she wouldn't face it alone. The weeks following Mira's revelation passed in a blur of activity. To her surprise and relief, the majority of Millbrook's residents had rallied around her, inspired by her story of resilience and redemption. The community safety initiative she had proposed gained new momentum, with volunteers signing up in droves to learn first aid, disaster preparedness, and conflict resolution. But beneath the surface of this newfound unity, tensions were brewing. As Mira threw herself into her work, expanding the initiative and coordinating with schools and local businesses, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Whispered conversations would stop abruptly when she entered her room, and she occasionally caught glimpses of unfamiliar faces watching her from a distance. It was on a crisp November morning, as Mira was setting up for a CPR class in the community center, that everything changed. Mayor Sandra Thompson burst into the room, her usually composed demeanor shattered by obvious distress. "Mira, we need to talk." "Now," the mayor said, her voice tight with urgency. Confused and alarmed, Mira followed Mayor Thompson to her office. As they entered, Mira was surprised to see Chief Hawkins already there, along with a stern-looking man in a dark suit whom she didn't recognize. "Mira, this is Agent Callahan from the FBI," Mayor Thompson said, gesturing to the unfamiliar man. "He's here about. Well, perhaps it's best if he explains." Agent Callahan fixed Mira with an intense gaze. "Miss Patel, we have reason to believe that Millbrook is in imminent danger. We've uncovered a plot by a domestic terrorist group to target your town." Mira felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "What? Why Millbrook? We're just a small town." "It appears that your recent notoriety has made Millbrook an attractive target," Agent Callahan explained. "This group, which calls itself the Purifiers, believes that your acceptance by the community despite your past sends the wrong message. They want to make an example of Millbrook." Chief Hawkins leaned forward, his face grim. "We've intercepted communications indicating they plan to strike during the Thanksgiving parade next week. Thousands of people will be gathered in the town square." Mira's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. "But surely we can stop them. Cancel the parade. Warn people." Agent Callahan shook his head. "If we alert the public now, we risk tipping off the terrorists. They could change their plans or target another town where we're not prepared. We need to catch them in the act." "So what do you need from me?" Mira asked, dreading the answer. Mayor Thompson and Chief Hawkins exchanged a look before the mayor spoke. "Mira, we're asking you to be the bait." The room fell silent as the weight of those words sank in. Mira felt as if she were underwater, the voices around her becoming muffled and distant as they explained the plan. She would need to continue as normal, even increase her public appearances. The FBI would use her as a focal point to draw out the terrorists while they gathered intelligence and prepared to intercept the attack. But it would put her at significant risk. As the details of the operation washed over her, Mira's mind wandered to the faces of her friends and neighbors. The children who attended her story times, the elderly patrons who relied on her help, the volunteers who had embraced her safety initiative. She thought of Tommy, the boy she had saved from the fire, and his crayon drawing that still hung on her refrigerator. "Ms. Patel," Agent Callahan's voice cut through her thoughts. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we need your decision. Will you help us?" Mira looked at the expectant faces around her and felt the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on her shoulders. If she agreed, she would be putting herself in the crosshairs of a dangerous group. If she refused, she might be condemning her entire town to an unknown fate. I need some time to think," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Mayor Thompson nodded sympathetically. "Of course. But please understand, time is of the essence. We'll need your answer by tomorrow morning at the latest." As Mira left the mayor's office, her head spinning, she found herself walking aimlessly through the streets of Millbrook. The town she had come to love now seemed alien and threatening. Every passing car, every stranger's glance made her jump. Without realizing it, she had made her way to Willow Creek Park. As she sat on her favorite bench, watching the late autumn sun glint off the water, she heard approaching footsteps. "Penny, for your thoughts," came a familiar voice. Mira looked up to see Sarah, a concerned expression on her face. "You missed the CPR class," Sarah said, sitting down beside her. "Is everything okay?" Mira wanted desperately to confide in her friend, to share the burden of the choice she faced. But Agent Callahan's warnings about secrecy echoed in her mind. Instead, she forced a smile. "Just feeling a bit overwhelmed with everything," she said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Sarah studied her for a moment, clearly not entirely convinced. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? After everything we've been through, you don't have to face your problems alone." Mira felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I know," she said softly. "And I'm so grateful for that. For you, for this town, for everything." As they sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over Willow Creek, Mira's mind raced. She thought about the life she had built in Millbrook, the second chance she had been given. She thought about the trust her neighbors had placed in her, even after learning about her past. And then, with a clarity that surprised her, she realized that she had already made her decision. The scared teenager who had once set a fire to escape her problems was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned the true meaning of courage and community. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mira stood up. "Thank you, Sarah," she said, giving her friend a quick hug. "I think I know what I need to do now." Sarah looked at her quizzically. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mira nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. "I will be. We all will be." As she walked home that night, Mira's steps were purposeful. She knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, that she would be putting everything on the line. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. The strength of Millbrook flowed through her veins, giving her the courage to face whatever came next. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Mira walked into the mayor's office. Agent Callahan, Chief Hawkins, and Mayor Thompson were already there, their faces etched with worry and lack of sleep. "I'll do it," Mira said without preamble. "Whatever you need me to do to protect this town, I'm in." The relief on their faces was palpable, but Mira held up a hand before they could speak. "I'll do it," Mira said without preamble. "Whatever you need me to do to protect this town, I'm in." The relief on their faces was palpable, but Mira held up a hand before they could speak. "But I have conditions." Agent Callahan's eyebrows rose, a mixture of surprise and respect crossing his face. "We're listening, Ms. Patel." Mira took a deep breath, steeling herself. "First, I want a small team of trusted community members to be informed and involved. We can't do this alone, and Millbrook has resources you might not be aware of." Chief Hawkins nodded approvingly, but Agent Callahan frowned. "Ms. Patel, the fewer people who know about this operation, the better. We can't risk." "With all due respect, Agent," Mira interrupted, her voice firm. "You don't know this town like I do. We have ex-military, former emergency responders, and people with skills that could be invaluable. Keeping them in the dark is not only a waste but potentially dangerous. Mayor Thompson leaned forward, intrigued. Who did you have in mind, Mira? Sarah from the library, for one. She has a background in data analysis that could help us spot patterns. Mr. Grayson, the retired English teacher, he was a communications specialist in the Navy. And Rosa Hernandez, she runs the community garden, but she used to work in disaster relief. As Mira listed off names and skills, she could see the others in the room reassessing their approach. Even Agent Callahan seemed to be coming around to the idea. All right, he said finally. We'll vet your suggestions and bring in those we feel can be trusted. What else? Mira's next words surprised even herself. I want to expand the community safety initiative, not just first aid and CPR, but self-defense classes, situational awareness workshops, the works. If we're going to make me a target, we should use it as an opportunity to make the whole town safer. Chief Hawkins grinned. I like the way you think, Mira. We could frame it as a response to your increased public profile. People wanting to emulate your heroism. Exactly, Mira nodded. And finally, I want full transparency about the risks I'm taking. No sugarcoating, no withholding information for my own good. I need to know exactly what I'm up against. The room fell silent as the others exchanged glances. Finally, Agent Callahan spoke. Those terms are unconventional. But given the unique situation we're in, I think we can work with them. You've got yourself a deal, Miss Patel. As they shook hands, Mira felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. She had just volunteered to be the bait in a dangerous game of cat and mouse with domestic terrorists. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she had some control over the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Mira met with her hand-picked team, sworn to secrecy about the true nature of the threat, but eager to help protect their town. Sarah's analytical skills proved invaluable as they pored over social media posts and local news reports, looking for any hint of the purifier's activities. Mr. Grayson threw himself into crafting a public communication strategy, carefully wording announcements about the expanded safety initiative to draw attention without raising alarm. And Rosa's experience in crisis management helped them set up discreet supply catches and evacuation routes throughout Millbrook. As the Thanksgiving parade drew nearer, Mira found herself in the spotlight more than ever. She gave interviews to local news stations about the importance of community preparedness, demonstrated safety techniques at the high school, and even judged a children's art contest with the theme Hometown Heroes. But beneath the smiles and public appearances, Mira's nerves were frayed. Every unfamiliar face in the crowd, every unexpected noise made her jump. The strain of maintaining her composure while knowing she was being hunted was taking its toll. It was during one of these moments of near panic that Mira stumbled upon an unexpected ally. She had ducked into a small alley behind Main Street, desperate for a moment of privacy to catch her breath. As she leaned against the cool brick wall, trying to slow her racing heart, a gravelly voice spoke from the shadows. Rough day, eh, kid? Mira spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. From behind a dumpster emerged old Joe, the town's resident homeless man. His weathered face was creased with concern as he regarded her. I'm fine, Mira managed to say, forcing a smile. Just needed some air. Old Joe snorted. Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. You've got the look of someone carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. Trust me, I know that look. Something in his tone made Mira pause. She studied old Joe more closely, noticing for the first time the way he held himself, ramrod straight despite his apparent age, his eyes sharp and assessing. Who are you really, Joe? Mira asked quietly. A sad smile crossed the old man's face. Once upon a time, I was Sergeant Joseph Mackenzie, Force Recon Marines. Now, I'm just a guy who's seen too much and drinks to forget. He paused, his gaze intense. But I haven't forgotten how to spot trouble brewing. This town's sitting on a powder keg, isn't it? Mira felt a wave of relief wash over her. Here was someone who understood, someone she didn't have to pretend with. Before she knew it, she was pouring out the whole story. The purifiers, the FBI's plan, her role as bait. Old Joe listened silently, his expression growing grimmer with each word. When Mira finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're braver than you know, kid," he said finally. "But you're in over your head. These types, they don't play by the rules. The FBI's plan is solid, but they're missing something crucial." "What's that?" Mira asked, leaning in. "Local knowledge," Old Joe said, tapping his temple. "I've been on these streets for years. I see things, hear things. People ignore me, talk freely around me. If these purifier folks are in town, I'll know about it." Mira felt a glimmer of hope. "You'd help us?" Old Joe straightened up, something of his old military bearing shining through. "Millbrook's been good to me, even when I didn't deserve it. About time I returned the favor. Count me in, kid." As Mira left the alley, her steps lighter than they had been in days, she marveled at how help could come from the most unexpected places. She had started this journey feeling alone and overwhelmed, but now she was surrounded by a network of allies, each bringing their own unique skills and perspectives to the fight. But even as her team grew stronger, so did the sense of impending danger. Strange cars were spotted lingering near the library and community center. Cryptic messages appeared scrawled on walls, only to be quickly painted over. And through it all, the clock ticked down to Thanksgiving. 3 days before the parade, as Mira was leaving a late-night planning session at the police station, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The street was deserted, pools of lamplight creating islands in the darkness. And in one of those shadows, she could swear she saw movement. Her hand inched towards the panic button Chief Hawkins had given her, but before she could press it, a figure stepped into the light. Mira's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the face from the FBI briefings. Marcus Holt, one of the suspected leaders of the purifiers. "Hello, Mira," he said, his voice chillingly pleasant. "I think it's time you and I had a chat about the future of Millbrook." As Mira stood frozen, her mind racing through the self-defense moves she had recently learned, she realized that the true test was only just beginning. The game had changed, and now she was face to face with the very danger she had been preparing for. In that moment, with fear and determination warring within her, Mira made a choice. She straightened her spine, looked Marcus Holt directly in the eye, and said the words that would set in motion a chain of events that would change Millbrook forever. "I'm listening. But know this, whatever you're planning, you've got the whole town to deal with, not just me." As a slow, dangerous smile spread across Marcus Holt's face, Mira steeled herself for what was to come. The quiet librarian who had become an unlikely hero was about to face her greatest challenge yet, and the fate of Millbrook hung in the balance. The streetlight flickered ominously as Mira stood face to face with Marcus Holt, the air between them charged with tension. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither spoke, each assessing the other. Finally, Marcus broke the silence, his voice deceptively calm. "You've caused quite a stir, Miss Patel. A town embracing a criminal, hailing her as a hero. It goes against everything we stand for." Mira's mind raced, years of de-escalation training from her librarian days kicking in. "And what exactly do you stand for, Mr. Holt? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like fear and division." A flicker of surprise crossed Marcus's face before his mask of cool indifference slipped back into place. "We stand for justice, for consequences. Actions should have repercussions. Don't you agree?" "I do," Mira said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Which is why I've spent every day since my mistake trying to make amends, to be better. Isn't that what justice should be about? Rehabilitation, not just punishment." Marcus's eyes narrowed. Pretty words. But some sins can't be washed away so easily. Millbrook needs to learn that lesson, and you're going to help us teach it. Before Mira could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the empty street. Marcus melted back into the shadows with a final, chilling whisper. "We'll be in touch." As he disappeared, Mira's legs gave out, and she sank to the curb, her whole body shaking. That's how Chief Hawkins found her moments later, alerted by the silent alarm on her panic button. "Mira, are you hurt? What happened?" the chief asked, kneeling beside her. Through chattering teeth, Mira recounted her encounter with Marcus Holt. As she spoke, she could see the color drain from Chief Hawkins' face. "This changes everything," he muttered, helping Mira to her feet. "We need to call an emergency meeting. Now." The next few hours passed in a blur. Mira found herself in the basement of the police station, surrounded by her unlikely team of defenders. Agent Callahan paced the room, barking orders into his phone. Mayor Thompson sat with her head in her hands, the weight of her responsibility evident in every line of her body. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the basement's tiny windows, a plan began to take shape, but it was a plan that filled Mira with dread. "We can't cancel the parade," Agent Callahan insisted. "It's our best chance to draw them out, to catch them in the act." "But now they've made direct contact with Mira," Sarah protested. "Surely that changes things." Old Joe, who had been silently observing from a corner, finally spoke up. "The agent's right. Cancel the parade, and they'll just find another target, maybe one we're not prepared for. We need to control the battlefield." Mira listened to the arguments swirling around her, a strange calm settling over her. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "I'll do it," she said simply. "I'll lead the parade, just as we planned. But I have an idea that might give us an edge." All eyes turned to her as Mira outlined her proposal. It was risky, unconventional, and more than a little terrifying. But as she spoke, she could see the spark of hope igniting in the eyes of her allies. "It's crazy," Chief Hawkins said when she finished, "but it just might work." The next 2 days were a frenzy of covert preparations. On the surface, Millbrook continued its Thanksgiving preparations as normal. But beneath the festive exterior, a current of nervous energy ran through the town. Mira threw herself into her role, making high-profile appearances and giving upbeat interviews about the parade. But in secret, she met with her team, fine-tuning every detail of their plan. Sarah coordinated a network of volunteers, each armed with a specially designed app that would allow them to report suspicious activity discreetly. Mr. Grayson worked tirelessly on a coded communication system, hidden within seemingly innocent parade announcements. Rosa Hernandez turned her skills to transforming innocuous parade floats into potential defensive structures, while Old Joe tapped into his underground network, gathering invaluable intelligence on the Purifier's movements. As the sun rose on Thanksgiving morning, Mira stood in front of her mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Gone was the quiet, unassuming librarian. In her place stood someone harder, more determined, with a glint of steel in her eyes. She made her way to the parade's starting point, her heart pounding but her steps unwavering. As she took her place at the head of the procession, Mira caught sight of her team spread throughout the crowd. Sarah gave her a subtle nod, Mr. Grayson a reassuring smile. Old Joe was nowhere to be seen, but Mira knew he was out there, watching from the shadows. Mira chased Marcus Holt down a narrow alley, her lungs burning with each breath. The sounds of chaos from the town square faded behind them, replaced by the echoing slap of their footsteps on wet pavement. As they rounded a corner, Mira found herself in a part of Millbrook she'd never seen before, a maze of abandoned warehouses that spoke of the town's industrial past. Marcus darted into one of the decrepit buildings, and Mira hesitated for a split second before following. The interior was dark and musty, filled with rusting machinery and forgotten dreams. Shafts of sunlight pierced through holes in the roof, creating islands of visibility in the gloom. "Give it up, Marcus," Mira called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's over. The town knows what you're trying to do." A chilling laugh answered her. "Oh, Mira, you still don't get it, do you? This was never just about Millbrook. Suddenly, floodlights blazed to life, momentarily blinding Mira. As her eyes adjusted, she found herself surrounded by a dozen stern-faced individuals, all wearing the same nondescript clothing as the attackers in the square. Marcus stepped forward, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Welcome to the real heart of the Purifiers, Mira. You've played your part perfectly." Mira's mind raced, trying to understand. "What are you talking about? Did you really think a group like ours would expend so much effort on one small town?" Marcus asked, circling her slowly. Millbrook was never the target. It was the test run. With a gesture, he indicated a wall covered in maps and photographs. Mira's blood ran cold as she recognized other small towns, cities, community leaders, all marked with ominous red X. "You see, Mira, what happened here in Millbrook. A town embracing a criminal, celebrating her as a hero. It's happening all over the country. People forgetting the importance of law and order, of consequences for one's actions. We needed to understand how these communities tick, how they respond to threats. And thanks to you, we now have a blueprint." Mira felt sick. All this time, she thought she had been protecting her town, but in reality, she had been helping the Purifiers refine their tactics for larger attacks. But as she looked closer at the wall of targets, something caught her eye. A pattern in the marked locations, a familiar coding system hidden within the seemingly random arrangement. With a jolt, she realized it was the same code Mr. Grayson had developed for their parade communications. In that moment, several things clicked into place. Old Joe's mysterious past, Sarah's too-perfect background in data analysis, Rosa's surprisingly extensive knowledge of urban warfare tactics. She wasn't the only one with secrets in Millbrook. A slow smile spread across Mira's face as she turned back to Marcus. "You're right. I don't get it. But I think you're the one who's been played." Before Marcus could respond, the warehouse erupted into chaos. The roof exploded inward as rappelling lines dropped through, carrying black-clad figures. At the same time, the walls seemed to come alive, panels sliding away to reveal hidden compartments packed with armed agents. "FBI. Everybody down." The command rang out, echoing off the metal walls. In the ensuing mayhem, Mira caught glimpses of familiar faces. Old Joe, moving with the fluid grace of a much younger man, efficiently disarming two Purifiers. Sarah, her librarian's cardigan discarded, skillfully coordinating the FBI strike team through a high-tech headset. Rosa, wielding a set of eskrima sticks with deadly precision. As Marcus lunged for her, rage contorting his features, Mira reacted on instinct. She sidestepped his attack, using his momentum against him just as Rosa had taught her. Marcus went flying, crashing into a stack of old crates. "It's over, Marcus," Mira said, standing over him as FBI agents moved in to make the arrest. "You wanted to test Millbrook's response. Well, here it is. We protect our own. All of our own, regardless of their past." As the dust settled, and the last of the Purifiers were led away in handcuffs, Mira found herself face to face with Agent Callahan. But this time, there was a newfound respect in his eyes. "You did good, Miss Patel," he said, "though I suspect you have some questions for us." Mira looked around at her friends, her team, each of them now revealed to be so much more than they had seemed. "You could say that," she replied dryly. The debriefing took place in the basement of the library, which, as it turned out, had been retrofitted into a state-of-the-art command center. As Mira sank into a comfortable chair, nursing a cup of much-needed coffee, she listened in amazement to the full story. The threat of the Purifiers had been on the FBI's radar for months, their extremist ideology spreading like wildfire through online forums and encrypted chat rooms. But it was only when they set their sights on Millbrook that a plan began to take shape. "We needed a way to draw them out, to understand their methods," Agent Callahan explained. "And your story, Mira, the librarian with a troubled past turned local hero, it was the perfect bait." "So you set all this up?" Mira asked, still trying to process everything. The fire at the library, my sudden fame. Old Joe, or rather, Senior Agent Joseph Mackenzie, shook his head. Not the fire. That was real, as was your heroism. But we saw an opportunity and we took it. We amplified your story, made sure it spread beyond Millbrook. And then you inserted yourselves into my life, Mira said, looking at Sarah and Rosa. Built up my confidence, taught me to defend myself. Sarah had the grace to look somewhat abashed. We never lied about who we are, Mira. We just omitted certain details about our backgrounds. Everything else, our friendship, our belief in you, that was real. Mira sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. Part of her wanted to be angry, to feel used. But as she looked around at the faces of her friends, her team, she realized that regardless of how it had started, what they had built together was genuine. So what happens now? She asked finally. Agent Callahan leaned forward. That's partly up to you, Miss Pottle. With the purifiers neutralized, our official operation here is over. But the work of bringing communities together, of bridging divides and promoting understanding, that's ongoing. And I think you've proven that you have a unique talent for it. Mira's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. Are you offering me a job? A chorus of chuckles filled the room. Not exactly, Rosa said, a mischievous glint in her eye. More like a consultancy, a chance to take what you've learned here in Millbrook and apply it on a larger scale. Think of it as a mobile library program, Mr. Grayson added. But instead of books, you'll be bringing hope and resilience to communities in need. Mira's mind whirled with the possibilities. It was far beyond anything she had ever imagined for herself. And yet, it felt right, like all the twists and turns of her life had been leading her to this moment. As the discussion continued late into the night, plans taking shape for this new chapter in Mira's life, she couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought her here. From a scared teenager making a desperate choice, to a quiet librarian seeking redemption, to an unlikely hero thrust into extraordinary circumstances. But even as she embraced this new path, Mira knew that Millbrook would always be home. The town that had given her a second chance, that had stood by her in her darkest hour, would forever hold a special place in her heart. As dawn broke over Millbrook, casting golden light through the library windows, Mira Patel stood at the threshold of a new adventure. The quiet librarian had found her voice, and now she was ready to use it to make a difference, not just in one small town, but in communities across the nation. The story of Millbrook's unlikely hero was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 1 year had passed since the fateful Thanksgiving that had changed Millbrook, and Mira Patel, forever. The town square, once the site of chaos and confrontation, was now adorned with festive decorations as Millbrook prepared for its annual Unity Festival. Mira stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of familiar faces. So much had changed, and yet the heart of Millbrook remained the same, a community bound together by shared experiences and mutual support. A year ago, Mira began, her voice carrying clearly across the square. We faced a threat that sought to divide us, to punish us for our capacity for forgiveness and growth. But Millbrook proved that our strength lies in our unity, in our ability to see the best in one another. As she spoke, Mira's gaze swept over the crowd, picking out familiar faces. There was Tommy, the boy she had saved from the library fire, now proudly wearing a junior firefighter's badge. Mrs. Perkins, once her harshest critic, nodded along with her words, a small smile on her face. We've all been on a journey this past year, Mira continued. We've learned that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear cardigans and reading glasses. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. We've discovered strengths we never knew we had, and we've learned that our differences can be our greatest asset when we work together. As Mira spoke about the changes Millbrook had undergone, her mind drifted to her own transformative journey. The past year had been a whirlwind of activity as she balanced her new consulting role with her commitment to her hometown. She had traveled to communities across the country, each facing its own unique challenges. In a Rust Belt town grappling with economic decline, she had helped establish a community center that offered job retraining and youth programs. In a city torn apart by racial tensions, she had facilitated dialogue sessions that brought people from all walks of life together. But always, she returned to Millbrook, bringing back new ideas and perspectives. The town had become a model of community resilience, hosting workshops and seminars for other small towns looking to strengthen their social fabric. The library, rebuilt and expanded, now boasted a state-of-the-art emergency response center in its basement, a reminder that knowledge and preparedness went hand in hand. Sarah, now officially recognized as an FBI liaison, ran regular cybersecurity workshops for residents of all ages. Old Joe, or Agent Mackenzie, as he was now known, had traded his ragged coat for a smart uniform, heading up a new community outreach program for veterans. His gruff exterior remained, but there was a newfound light in his eyes as he mentored young people interested in law enforcement and community service. Rosa had transformed the community garden into an urban farming initiative, teaching sustainable agriculture techniques and helping to address food insecurity in Millbrook and beyond. Her Eskrima sticks were now used more for demonstrations at the local martial arts studio she had opened than for covered operations. And Mr. Grayson, his passion for communication finding a new outlet, had started a popular podcast discussing everything from local history to global events, fostering critical thinking and open dialogue among listeners of all ages. As Mira concluded her speech, she felt a swell of emotion. Millbrook has shown that a community is not defined by its challenges, but by how it rises to meet them. We've proven that second chances are not just possible, but essential for growth. And we've demonstrated that the true measure of a hero is not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday acts of kindness and courage that bind us together. The crowd erupted in applause, and as Mira stepped down from the podium, she was engulfed in a sea of hugs and handshakes. But one face in particular caught her eye, a stranger standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her intently. As the festival kicked into full swing, Mira made her way through the throng towards the mysterious observer. As she drew closer, she realized it was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with a haunted look in her eyes that Mira recognized all too well. "Can I help you?" Mira asked gently. The young woman startled, as if surprised to be noticed. I'm not sure," she stammered. "I heard about you, about what happened here in Millbrook. I thought maybe." She trailed off, looking lost. Mira's heart went out to her. "Why don't we grab a cup of coffee and talk?" she suggested, gesturing towards the new cafe that had opened on the square. As they settled into a quiet corner booth, the young woman, who introduced herself as Zoe, slowly began to open up. She had made a mistake in her past, she explained, one that had left her feeling like she could never move forward, never be accepted again. "I saw what happened here in Millbrook," Zoe said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "How you were given a second chance, how the whole town stood by you. I guess I came here hoping to find it for yourself," Mira finished softly. Zoe nodded, looking down at her untouched coffee. Mira reached across the table, gently taking Zoe's hand. "Let me tell you something I've learned, Zoe. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's something you work at every day, with every choice you make, and it's not something you have to do alone." As they talked, Mira felt a sense of déjà vu. She saw in Zoe the same fear and hopelessness she had once felt, the same desperate need for acceptance and understanding. But she also saw strength, resilience, and the capacity for growth. By the time they left the cafe, the sun was setting over Millbrook, casting a warm glow over the festival goers. Mira had offered Zoe a place to stay and the promise of help in starting her own journey of redemption. As they walked back towards the square, Mira caught sight of her team. Sarah, Old Joe, Rosa, and Mr. Grayson, all watching her with knowing smiles. They had seen this scene play out before in towns and cities across the country. Meera Patel, the unlikely hero of Millbrook, paying forward the second chance she had been given. That night, as the Unity Festival wound down and the stars came out over Millbrook, Meera stood on the steps of the library, looking out over her beloved town. She thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. The fires she had set and the fires she had extinguished, the fears she had faced and the strengths she had discovered. Millbrook had changed her, had forged her into someone she never imagined she could be. But she had changed Millbrook too, helping to transform it from a typical small town into a beacon of hope and resilience. As she turned to go back inside, Meera's gaze fell on the plaque that had been installed beside the library doors. It read, "In every book, a new beginning. In every person, the potential for heroism. Millbrook Public Library, where second chances write new stories." Meera smiled, running her fingers over the engraved words. The quiet librarian who had become an unlikely hero had found her true calling, not just in saving lives, but in changing them. And as she stepped into the library, ready to start a new chapter with Zoe, Meera Patel knew that her greatest adventures still lay ahead. The story of Millbrook and of Meera Patel served as a powerful reminder that heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places, that communities are strongest when they stand together, and that it's never too late for a new beginning. As long as there were stories to be told and second chances to be given, Meera would be there, turning the page to a brighter future, one reader at a time.